to hear the puppeteers play the characters that you cheer. So join us as we go below the frame. Today on Below the Frame, we're talking with Sesame Street Muppet performer Pam Arciero. Pammy plays Grundgetta and so many others on Sesame Street and a lot of other shows. And she talks about growing up in Hawaii, her big audition for Sesame Street, Richard Hunt, paying it forward, and so much more. We're also going to be talking about right hands. So don't draw attention to yourself. It's time to go below the frame. Go below the frame. Welcome to Below the Frame. Here is where you will hear from actual Sesame Street and Disney Muppet performers and others in that universe of very creative and very talented people. And we're also going to give you tips and helpful hints if you think that, being a Muppet performer is what you want to be when you grow up, no matter what age you happen to be. My name is Matt Vogel, and I am your host. I work as both a Sesame Street and a Disney Muppet performer, and I am so happy to report that it is a dream come true. I never thought, when I was a kid, when I was watching Sesame Street and The Muppet Show, that I would one day be performing alongside my heroes. And I started out in the beginning, when I first got to Sesame Street, like all of us do, as a right-hand performer. And we're going to go into that quite a bit today in this episode because we are talking with one of the masters of right-hand performing, Pam Arciero. But Pam has also performed so many other characters on a bunch of different shows, including Grundgetta on Sesame Street. And we are going to talk about all of that right now, assuming you're ready. Because I'm ready. You ready? We're ready? Okay, great. So let's go below the frame with Pam Arciero. Pam Arciero, hello, my friend. Thank you for being on Below the Frame.
Of course. I'm lovely to be here, as always, Matt Vogel.
Yeah, well, you've been in the business, professionally speaking, for about 40 years, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
Yes,
Something
correct.
Like that?
About 40.
Well,
almost 40, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get to all of that and more right now. So are you ready?
Yes, okay.
All right, we're going to start at the beginning. Just tell me a little bit about growing up. You grew up in Hawaii.
Correct. I was born and raised outside Honolulu in a little valley called Ainahaina. And
I'm sorry, say the name again.
Ainahaina.
Okay, I'm not going to. It sounds lovely.
Nothing could be finer than to be in Ainahaina.
Yeah, okay. So, first of all, I got to say that you grew up in Hawaii is amazing.
Yeah.
Is it as beautiful as...
Absolutely. It is an amazingly wonderful place to grow up. I spent a lot of my school years going to the beach instead of being in school. We would play hooky and go body surfing.
Why wouldn't you?
You have to. It was quite idyllic. It was much less crowded. It's crowded now, so it's not as much fun for me when I go back. But growing up, it was just the best. It was sunny and warm, and everywhere you go, I grew up always seeing water. Like every place you drive, the ocean is on one side and the mountains are on the other. And every place I would go, I always saw the ocean. And the most shocking thing for me moving to Connecticut was that you don't see water all the time.
That's right. It's not an everyday thing.
I didn't even know where I was. Like my directions are oriented between the mountains and the ocean. And in Hawaii, they call it Mauka and Makai. We don't have east, west, north, south. We have Mauka, Makai, Eva Beach, and Diamond Head are our directions because the island isn't, so that's the way I grew up. I grew up seeing water always. And so a real shock was to come to the East Coast and be basically what I felt was landlocked. I haven't gone to Kansas City now, where you're from. Really
is landlocked. Yeah, I grew up in a place where there was no water around me, so everywhere I looked, I knew exactly the directions because I could tell from the sun, I guess. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about your family.
I was one of 5 kids. I'm the second to the youngest, and my father and mother met during World War II.
Oh.
My father came to Hawaii just before Pearl Harbor. My grandfather was arrested during Pearl Harbor. I am Japanese, Hawaiian, Italian, and English. And actually, thanks to the DNA ancestry and all that now, I found out that I'm actually, the most I am is Japanese of all
really?
the ethnic groups that I'm mixed up in. I'm about 23% Japanese, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Because I thought, I was a lot more Hawaiian than I am and other things. Italian, I'm not as much Italian
not as
either.
much.
So what happened was my grandfather was a single guy. My grandmother had died a long time before, and he was driving past Pearl Harbor. He's half Japanese. Mm-hmm. And they snag him because it just after it happened, it was going on while he was driving home from his girlfriend's back to my mother's house. And they arrested him, and my dad had to go get him out of jail, basically, and prove that he was an American citizen because he was born and raised in Hawaii. And as being born in Hawaii, you were considered an American citizen since the U.S. took it over in 1854.
But they had to convince
your dad. My dad, fortunately, was an Italian from the East Coast.
Okay.
They believed that if he's claiming this Japanese guy is not a Japanese spy, that he's not.
It's good enough for them.
Yes.
What are the things that you did as a kid? I know you went to the beach a lot when you were in school. Probably, I'm guessing that was maybe high school years. But as a little kid, what were you doing? The second youngest. What were you doing? What kind of things were you doing?
Well, I was always I loved dancing, and Hawaii music and dance are very big. And every family party has people playing music and singing and dancing. And so I was in ballet from an extremely young age, and that's what I did. And hula. Everybody takes hula. And, normal neighborhood things. There was a stream in our backyard. I spent a lot of time catching fish and doing stupid, weird things like that. My mother would bring home stray animals. I always would pick up stray animals and drive my mother insane.
And when you were a kid, did you have any aspirations to being in the arts? I mean, as you said, you were ballet. You were doing ballet.
I wanted to be a ballet dancer, big time. And in fact, my undergraduate degree from the University of Hawaii is in dance. And I was extremely outgoing, surprisingly speaking. And it's kind of funny when you grow up in Hawaii. My neighborhood was all Japanese families and a couple of Hawaiian families, but mostly Japanese. And in school, Japanese students didn't speak out loud. And so I was the really big mouth in class. And I would be sent to the principal all the time for speaking out so much. But seriously, if you ask a classroom full of 18 Japanese kids and 2 Hawaiians and this one hapa haole, which is what I was called because I was a mix. The only ones who answers the questions are the hapa haoles and the Hawaiians. And so it was very interesting. And the theory about that, it's a cultural thing because the theory with Japanese culture is you don't want to be the nail sticking up from the wood because you will get the hammer. So you don't want to stand out. You want to be level.
To be unseen.
Yeah, so it was very interesting. So because of that, my naturally outgoing nature, and in a situation where I was the only one doing it, I was always the kid doing the neighborhood plays, hanging up the script, come on over, you guys sit there. So not
you
only
were the entertainer.
I was the entertainer. I ran around doing stupid entertaining things for the other kids.
And is that what you did then? You went to college to be a dancer?
Yes. I went to the university with the intention of getting the dance degree. Well, I went in with sort of drama too because I liked acting, singing, dancing. And I was singing a lot. In high school, I sang a ton. I played coffee shops and bars, played guitar and sang in those areas. So, the thing with puppetry that's so wonderful is that it was everything that I liked to do.
Yeah.
Because I was also, I like to make stuff. I like to make things. I would make little sculptures, and making puppets was a joy for me when I discovered it because it was all my skill sets. I had done a lot of sculpture and ceramics. I was actually doing a lot of art. The art I did was mostly 3D. And
how did you discover puppetry and that, I like to make puppets?
Well, I actually was in dance, and I was doing a creative movement company. I worked in a creative movement company where we'd go to schools and do creative movement shows with kids and get them up and dancing and teaching them of that movement is good for them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then this man named Kermit Love, who built the original Big Bird, was coming to teach a summer puppetry class. And so the people I was in the movement company with said, you got to take this class with us. We're going to take puppetry. Take the class with us. And I went, well, okay. And I was probably in my end of my junior year of college when he came that first summer, and going into my senior year. And he came, and here was this amazing man. He's, of course, from the East Coast. In Hawaii, you always, it's kind of like your second tier American. So to have this whole big, fancy New York guy come and teach us was huge. And so we were all in the class, very excited. And then he turns out to be this amazing, weird, extremely wonderful person for me. Kermit has got a very varied reputation.
Right, yes.
But for me, he just opened up my eyes to this art form that could be dancing, could be singing, could be acting, and could be building and creating puppets. And there's whole universe opened. And I knew at that very moment, after working with Kermit for 2 weeks, that this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Was it a specific kind of puppetry that he was teaching, or was he teaching all the different kinds of
He taught
puppetry?
a broad range. Of course, he was mostly oriented towards the Muppet style, because that's kind of what was happening at the time, and that's what he was working in. He was working for Sesame Street, building the Snuffleupagus, building Big Birds. He was making the big puppets, and he was making lip sync style puppets as well. So it was kind of out of that. We did a show. He came for 2 summers, and we did a show at the end of every summer that had all kinds of puppets in it, and all of us performing with him. And it was really quite a joy. And interestingly enough, his partner, Christopher Lyle, came and taught ballet, which I was also taking. So I studied with both of them, which was kind of a fun event for us all in Hawaii at the time.
You mentioned that Kermit was already working on Sesame Street and building Snuffy and Big Bird. Were you aware of Sesame Street?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had been babysitting as part of my income, nannying in college. And babysitting from a fairly young age. And I think Sesame went on air when I was like 12 or 13. So I was aware of it. But as that's how I became aware. And then once I saw it, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I would march children around a kitchen singing Sia's for Cookie, just to get them tired out.
Right.
Many circles of Sia's Cookie. Yes. Sia's for Cookie. And I loved them. They were beautiful and wonderful and amazing. And so that was part of the mystique, too. Not only here was this big New York guy, but he was working for this really famous puppet show. And that was very exciting. And then he also brought, at that point, Caroll Spinney came during one of those sessions. And he would do these live concerts. Big Bird would go out with the symphonies.
Yeah.
And he would sing songs, and he would direct the symphony. And so he was doing the one there in Hawaii at a place called the Shell, which is this beautiful outdoor arena kind of thing. And so Kermit said, come on down. And so I went and was backstage. It was big to do, and hanging out with Caroll and Debbie. And I was driving them around, actually. I ended up being their kind of chauffeur. So we had a great time. And I think some of you might have heard the story about me Caroll saying to me, well, why don't you come to New York? We could use someone like you. And me going, what? And Debbie going, yeah, let me talk to Jim about it. It'll be fine. It wasn't quite that
It wasn't
direct.
that easy. It wasn't that direct. But the intention was probably very pure and from the heart.
And very encouraging.
So what did you think? Did you think, well, okay, I will try? Or did you have business to do in Hawaii that you needed to
I wanted to finish my degree, which I did, my undergraduate degree. So I had things to do there to finish up. And then in thinking about it, my mother said, you're going to play with dolls? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, okay, honey, but learn to type, please, so you can have a job.
Practical.
That was my mother's experience of the world for women, was that you better know how to type well, which I of course, refused to learn to do. So I'm okay now because everybody is. But,
that's right.
So then they said, well, you can go to New York why don't you go to graduate school and then go to New York? I said, okay, I'm going to graduate school in puppetry then. And she said, oh. And there were 2 places I could go. One was UCLA and the other was University of Connecticut. UCLA had a program that was mostly Asian style puppets. And I was obviously, after meeting Kermit, in love with the Muppet style. Now, University of Connecticut was more marionette than any other style, not really quite Muppet style yet either. But so I went to the University of Connecticut and got my graduate degree, and I would go down to New York back and forth, visiting Kermit, seeing Caroll, doing different stuff like that during that time while I was finishing my degree.
And when you were in Connecticut, did you live on campus?
Yeah, I eventually moved out of the campus in Stores and Ashford, Connecticut, up there, which is that surrounding area. And I met my husband, and we got married, and we've been married ever since. So
what year was that? When did you meet Steve?
I got married, we met in 1979, and I got married in 1980. So we're coming up on our 40th anniversary this year.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Which is shocking. I don't know how I got this old, but okay.
It happens very quickly, doesn't it?
It goes really stupid out. Suddenly you're old.
I know. And now here I come in and make you talk about your entire life. All right. So you are a student at University of Connecticut, and you are going into New York City to learn a little bit from Kermit Love, and you know that you want to be a puppeteer, or you want your life to be in puppetry. Right. And you were still building puppets and still...
Oh, yeah, because that's the degree at University of Connecticut. It was, and still is, very thorough. You build all forms of puppets. You perform in all forms of puppets. I actually performed with the University of Connecticut at the Kennedy Center during the Unima World Congress in 1980, and that was a rod puppet show, and I was Brunhilde in The Ring of the Nibelung. So we did all kinds of things. We did marionettes. We did shadow puppets. We did everything. And then I was going back and forth and trying to learn from Kermit. And I spent a lot of time watching on the set of Sesame Street. I had met Jim and Frank and all the Muppet guys at various puppet festivals, as well as eventually they had an open call audition for people. And that's where I met Marty Robinson. He and
this is in 1980, 81?
81, yeah. And I was just finishing graduate school, so I went to this big audition, and they were basically looking for a new Snuffy.
But you didn't know this at first, did you?
No. We just thought they were, and maybe they were considering putting a woman in, I don't know. So we just went, and they eliminated a bunch of folks. And eventually...
Just before you go, this just popped into my head. There weren't very many female Muppet performers at this point. Fran was there, and Jane, of course.
And Jane had stopped performing. Fran was basically the only one that was consistent, and she was acting a lot, so she wasn't puppeteering full-time on Sesame.
Right, and then, of course, you had Louise in London.
Yeah.
But there weren't very many anyway.
Most of the women were only in for one season and then sort of didn't come back. Because as you know, it's a very hard job, and it takes a very special person to persevere in those situations.
Yeah.
And so there was a number of women who came and went, and Franny would come in just for inserts, which was maybe 6 days a year. And so there weren't a lot of women. And actually what they said to me at the end of the audition, eventually when there was just how many of us? There was probably 12 of us left after starting with maybe 50. Wow. Then they said, well, keep going. And Marty and I played off each other and had a great time and really liked each other. And they said, we're not looking for women this year, but we're only looking for Snuffy, but we're going to keep your name. So please keep us informed of your contact information. And I thought, oh, okay, well, again, in the circular file that way.
Right. You just kind of thought, nice try. But
well, that's it. Nice try. But I kept hanging out with Kermit and doing other things. And then Marty invited me to work with him on Little Shop of Horrors in that he needed help building and he needed volunteer help building. So I would just go in and help him cut some leaves for vines or whatever when he was doing the off-Broadway show, just so we could hang out and talk and fool around, because we just had fun as performers together.
Yeah.
We really,
he hadn't necessarily been cast at this point either, right?
He had been cast as Snuffy, and Kermit was really hard on him, getting him up to snuff on Snuffy. Yep. And Brian Meal had not left yet. He was just doing Snuffy. So Brian was still doing all the characters that Brian was doing.
And those characters are Telly and Grundgetta
and Nobel Price and Alphabet Bates. There's a whole bunch of those. He had about 6 characters that when he left, and he was doing Elmo. So he had 6 or 7 characters that were on all the time that needed to be replaced when he left, because he's an amazing performer.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to perform?
I know.
You?
Yeah. Brian Meal. Oh. I love Brian Meal.
I do too. He's a wonderful guy. So what happened was that Marty went into Snuffy, and then he got Little Shop. So he was doing Snuffy for like half a season. And I had went down once or twice to see him doing Snuffy and with Kermit, and was observing. I did a lot of observing at that time. I would just go in and watch the shooting, because there is no way to learn what we do, really, unless you're on that set. To sit and watch. You just need to sit and watch. And that's what Kermit would always tell me to just observe, see what they're doing, figure out what everybody does. And that's what you do. You figure out, what is that guy doing? Oh, he's a cameraman. Who's the guy standing next to him? Oh, he's a lighting guy, right? You have to, all that stuff. All those people, what they do and how you interact with them. And really you learn etiquette that way too.
That's true. You watch everybody on the crew and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, and that just takes time, and that takes paying attention. And then you also learn about the techniques, like Richard Hunt's fabulous doing the crossword puzzle until the moment the camera rolls. Or reading the paper. He was more reading the paper. Crossword was Jerry.
That's a high skill level. You can be reading the New York Times during the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2. Put your arm up and go.
That's what he did. He was always doing that. It drove the directors insane. I think he did it on purpose. But Richard could pull it out of his butt. Most people can't. You know, it was Richard. Richard was an amazing, special performer.
How close were you with Richard?
Very. I adored Richard. He was just tons of fun. It was heartbreaking. I can't believe we lost him ever. I still mourn his passing every day that I think of him. He was kind and crazy and truthful in a time when lots of people weren't necessarily being so truthful about what was going on out there, particularly in terms of human rights, gay rights. He was really something.
I heard he was very generous.
Yes.
What would he do? Because I've heard of his generosity.
Yeah, Richard loved to pick up checks. That was his thing. The reality was he felt so lucky to have the job he had. And he was such a generous man that he would never let any of us pick up a check. We would work and scheme to get those checks, and he would always have already paid for it when you sat down. He's already paid the bill. And we'd go to these kind of fancy restaurants around, we were at 55th Street then, 9th and 55th, and there were lots of nice, midtown restaurants we'd go for lunch. And we would just argue him to the ground. So finally, I started calling ahead one day. I called ahead, gave them my credit card number, which in those days, nobody did. You have to realize this is 30 years ago. Nobody did that. And so we walked in and we sat down, and Richard says, "Here's my card." And he goes, "It's already paid for." And I said, "No, how did you do that? It's not possible. That's my job." He was just terrible. But what it taught me was to pay it forward. And so younger puppeteers, and he knew we didn't have the money. We weren't making money that he was making. And so I always take younger puppeteers out to lunch. I always try to repay the same thing that Richard did for me with that pay it forward with younger people who don't have the money, who want to go out to lunch with us and hang with us, but really can't afford it.
That is part of it. It's the being off the set too. It's not just the learning and the observing that you're talking about on the set. And what does that guy do? What does that guy do? But what does this guy do when we all go out to lunch?
Right.
And how does that affect me? And how can I pay that forward one day?
Right. And it's a camaraderie that is so unique to what we do, that closeness, that community, because what we do is so odd. It's not like you can walk out and find another puppeteer that 2 blocks over who's been working, through lunch too. Right. It's a unique job. It's a unique way and societal, our own culture. We have such an interesting culture in terms of being puppeteers.
Well, I want to talk about that specifically, at least in terms of you actually going from observing on Sesame Street to performing on Sesame Street. How did that happen?
Well, I observed occasionally. John Stone would call me in to do a right hand. He'd throw me in, even though I wasn't being paid, just to let me try.
Wow.
Let me try. And I think he did that with Carmen too. I remember he did that with Carmen, because Carmen couldn't really be hired at that time.
Right.
Because she didn't have the right paperwork. And Carmen came in about 5 years after me, maybe 6 years after me. But they had a large open call again. That was my second time in. auditioning. And they called me back, sure enough. And they said, please come. And they started with about 300 people.
Wow.
And we had what they called workshops. Once a week. There'd be a 3 or 4 hour workshop. There'd be like an hour and a half, and then we'd have a half-hour break, and then another hour and a half. And it was basically Richard Hunt and Jane Henson teaching us the puppeteer and how you do it. And they had a camera set up.
Wow.
And again, in those days, people didn't have cameras, didn't have the access that we have now. You just couldn't get yourself on camera. So you had to be in that room and doing it and learning on the fly. There was no place to practice. I did eventually, I think I bought a camera system, and it was like $6,000, which back then was everything I had to buy this camera to rehearse with. And that did help. But it was very rare that you would have an at-home system that worked. And it was very different than what the 3-camera shoot was anyway. You know, once you hit 3 cameras, it's much different than just having your one little camera, as you know. So we started. So once a week we went in, and they wouldn't tell you. They'd just say, thank you, and we'll call you. So you didn't know if you were cut.
If you made it until you were called again.
Right. The following Monday or Tuesday, they would call you and say, please show up on Thursday or Friday, whatever it was. So you'd wait the weekend not knowing if you'd been cut yet. And we went for 4 months that way, and eventually ended up with 2 of us.
2 out of 300. And who was this? It was you
Camille Bernara. They were looking for Grundgetta. So Camille and I were down to it. And I walked into the room, and this goes with my classic. Some of you may have heard the story. I knew it was the final big audition. I didn't know how many people were left, but I knew it was not, because the week before there were maybe 10 or 12 people. So I knew it was down. I knew it was coming down to the final. And I'm walking down the street, and I'm nervous, and I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if this is it. I wonder if I'm going to get cast. And I'm having a bad hair day, and I'm feeling overweight. And I'm like, just such high anxiety walking into the place. And this homeless person looks up at me, and he goes, hey, Miss Piggy, you lose your hairbrush? And I thought, oh my God, the whole world knows. The whole world knows that I am not going to make this. Anyway, high stress. I walk in the room, and there is John Stone, Dulcie Singer, Lisa Simon. John Stone was, for those of you who don't know, was the original developer of Sesame Street, writer and director. Dulcie Singer was the executive producer. Lisa Simon was associate producer, executive producer. Jim Henson and Jane Henson were in the room. That's who I walked into audition for.
So not a bunch of slouches.
Yeah, just, a few folk who... Just a couple of folks.
Yeah.
No stress. Nothing. And so they were really looking for Grundgetta. And fortunately, I really knew Grundgetta. I think it was so close between me and Camille, because Camille's an excellent and wonderful performer. And she did eventually, as you know, become part of the cast. But she didn't know Grundgetta as well as I did. Like, her personality and character.
Why do you feel like you knew Grundgetta?
Because I studied her.
Oh, you
because
did?
I really put in the time, because I just knew that I knew enough to know that because Brian Meal was leaving, what are the characters that are going to be available?
And you watched him. I'm guessing you were there on set. You got to see.
I watched him on set, and I watched the shows to find her. So I just knew her really well. And so I think that's what's the leg up. So I do the audition, and I'm very scared. And I walk out the door, and I just go, oh God, they're not going to say anything. I'm not going to know. Oh, this is horrible. And then Dulcie says to me, wait a minute, Pam, you're leaving now, right? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, thank you very much. And we'll see you in September. And I went, wait, what? What do you mean you'll see me in September? She goes, well, we'd like you to do it on the show. Just go ahead. We'll let you know. You'll come in September, and you'll do her on the show. And that's how I was told I was on Sesame Street. And it was like, okay. So I'm floating down the street looking for the homeless guy to say, hey, Miss Piggy got it.
What year was this? When was this? Around
82, 83.
So that September, you find yourself on Sesame Street. The first day you came in, were you performing Grundgetta?
No, the first day I came in, actually, Kevin Clash was also hired that same year. We were hired the same year. Kevin had been on the show a couple of years before, but he had left to go do Captain Kangaroo, I believe it was, in Philadelphia. And so they rehired him the same year with me. And they gave us some new characters called Crystal and Mario, who were supposed to be a boy and girl playmate kind of thing, which didn't work, wasn't so well written, so it didn't work out. But that's okay. Yeah. But that was the first thing I did, was that. And then I was right-handing as well. Brian Meal had left at that time, and Marty had gotten telly. And so I did Crystal that day, and then I think I did a right hand for Marty in some scene. And then
you've been Marty's right hand
ever since. Yeah.
Why do you think it works so well with you and Marty?
Again, we really liked performing together. And so from that initial audition I want to say in 81, we just liked each other and we liked performing together. And this was just a great way for the two of us to continue consistently perform, because you weren't always going to get a character across the other person, but we consistently worked together on telly always, which was just so fun.
I love telly, Pam. And you and Marty, you're a fantastic team. Just hold on a minute there, Pam. It's time for a word from our sponsor.
Excuse me, sir. I wish to file a complaint.
Oh?
Yes, as you can see, I am a live hand character.
Oh, congratulations, sir. You should be very proud.
Never mind that. I am unable to experience my live-handedness to the fullest.
Why is that, sir? What's that?
That, sir, is my right arm. As you can see, this arm is dead.
Oh, no, it's not dead. It's just resting.
Resting?
Yeah, these live hands work hard. Grabbing, gripping, pointing, wiggling their little fingers. It's a full-time job, and your right hand's just having himself a little nap.
Now look here, sir. When I got onto the set this morning, I found that my right hand had been stuffed and pinned to my chest.
Well, that's standard practice, sir.
But not when I am supposed to be playing the guitar in the next scene. Both hands must be engaged, and this particular one is certainly not engaged. It's not resting, it's dead. There's no life in it. It's floppy, soggy, flaccid, fatigued, atrophied. This arm requires an assist.
Oh, is that all? Why didn't you say so? Here, have this one. He's young and could use the experience. He'll put some life into that arm of yours.
Oh, I sure will, sir. I can help you clap and grab things and hold things. Ooh, now you can play a guitar in that next scene. I can also help you if you want to hand something to another character. We can count to 8 with all of these fingers we've got, or if you really want to do something amazing, we can try to juggle.
What do I do if he gets overzealous like this?
All you have to do is grab that hand. Rein that sucker in. He'll get it. Remember, kid, it's not the right hand show. You're here to make him look good, that's all. Don't screw this up.
Thank you, sir. This is just what I needed. All right, kid, come on, let's play that guitar.
Right hands. They make your little puppet show look a little more real. With a very reverent bow to Monty Python, we'd like to say that's right. Today's episode of Below the Frame is brought to you by Right Hands. Like I said at the top of the show, being a right-hand performer is pretty much what you do when you first come to Sesame Street. And this is the part of the show where I usually, after the word from our sponsor, I usually talk a bit about our topic. But instead of me talking about it, we're just going to pick back up with Pam and talk about that very thing right now. And there is a very fine art to be a good right-hand performer.
Oh, yes.
Right? I mean, it's just as hard as being the principal performer, I would say, in a lot of ways.
In some ways, yeah. One of the things you have to do is be really keyed into the lead performer, because that's your job. Your job is to make that puppet whole. And you have to understand the person who's making that character well to complete them. And you can't do things that are inappropriate. You have to know the character. You can't do anything inappropriate to the character. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. You're the support. You're the main support in so many ways, as you know. And the skill set is not only being subtle and appropriate, but you also have to do things like handle props with your other hand that's free and hand something up and hold it the right way to camera and make sure that it's not glaring, shooting the glare off, or whatever it is, or that it can be seen, or that the lettering is going in the right direction, or that it's not blocking the face or the mouth of the character, or that it's not in the way of the other character on the scene.
Or the puppeteer below, even looking at the monitor.
Puppeteer.
You have to be so aware of yourself and where your body is and how it relates to your partner.
Right, and what they need to do. And you can't, it is such a hugely complicated thing to do that no one ever notices. I mean, the public generally would never notice. When it's done
really well, I would say, when it's done with such precision and skill, you might not notice it. I mean, I think there are people that go, oh, you mean there's another person that helps out.
Yeah. It should be effortless. It should be, you know, we are creating characters for people to believe in.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the whole character. We don't want anyone to think for a moment, oh, look, that hand did that really weird thing. Ooh, I wonder if that was someone else. You
Yes.
don't want that anyone to be thinking about that. You want them to think about this whole person, who this whole character is. And your job is to make sure that whatever you do supports that whole character and sells that disbelief, suspension of disbelief, that this is a living, breathing thing.
And while you do play characters on both Sesame Street and many other shows that I have a list of here that we'll talk about here in a second, but your relationship with Telly, that assisting job, I mean, you are part of Telly. It feels weird to me when somebody else is, for some reason, playing Telly's right hand. Well, usually because, you know, Grundgetta's in the shot. So,
right.
Pam's got to do that.
Yeah.
Well, now somebody else has to be Telly's right hand. It feels weird to me.
And I think it feels somewhat weird to Marty. The truth is, and we do encourage actually some younger puppeteers to come in and do that, because you learn a lot by doing different people's right hands.
Absolutely.
And you learn a lot about performing by who the lead performer is. And Marty is such a wonderful, specific performer, you know, with so much energy and so much skill that it's wonderful for someone to have the experience of working with him.
You're right. And what's great is that Marty has his energy and the way that he performs, and it's every bit as valid as the way that David does it, but he has David's style, and it's every bit as valid as Carmen's style, and so on and so on. Everybody has their own individual, unique style of performance in many ways, because this is such a complicated and detailed profession that you really do need to learn under all of those principal performers so that you can one day put a puppet on your hand and say something with it.
Right. Exactly.
How long to be even just a good right hand?
I think it takes 4 or 5 years minimally of working, and especially under the 3-camera system. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to get that 3-camera that it does take more than that, often 7 or 8 years, seasons, I should say, on camera, because you have to know, you have to be able to turn with the character without losing a beat when they do the camera cut, and he's going to turn to that camera to face it. You better be with him and not lagging behind, because you will blow a whole show by being a right hand. And that's ridiculous.
Oh, that's not a good feeling either.
It's not a good feeling. And you know,
you don't want to be the one that we're doing it over for, especially as a right hand.
Especially as a right hand. It's one thing if you're the performer and you have the lines and you go up on a line, but to be pointing in the wrong direction.
Right. Or pointing when you're not supposed to point.
Exactly. And they have to redo the shot. It's terrible. It's terrifying. And
it does take a while.
It takes a while. And as you said, everybody has different energy. When you right hand for Cookie, it's actually very, very subtle, more subtle than Telly. Mm-hmm. Cookie, for me, is David is a very exacting puppeteer. He is wonderfully precise.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, Cookie seems like this big out of control guy. He is not. So when you right hand with David, you have to be precise. You talk with David and see exactly what he wants.
Right.
Whereas with Telly, for me, mostly because I've done Telly for so many years, I just know where Marty's going to go. Sometimes before Marty knows.
Yeah.
You know, I literally know he's going to make that turn, and he doesn't even, it's not conscious on his part. For me, I try to stay one step ahead of him, and I do kind of know his rhythms and his abilities and what he's going to say and how Telly will feel about something, and how that's going to reflect in his, you know, whatever he's holding or pointing at or gesturing with.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Everybody does have their own styles that you have to kind of learn so that you can mimic it and just be able to keep up with them.
Right.
There's nothing like a stuck right hand.
Yeah, you might as well stuff it. Yeah.
Just stuff it and pin it if it's going to be the way.
Yeah, and it's a mirror process. You know, I think beginning actors all do mirroring exercises. Mm-hmm. It is somewhat of a mirror process. And a lot, actually, because you don't want to be higher. The left hand should not be, the right hand should not be higher than the left hand. You don't want to do something that makes the left hand, like you said, 2 fingers pointing. Horrifying. Right. You know, when you point at something, you never point with 2 fingers unless you're giving someone a thumbs up.
Right.
And so
which I do all the time.
Yeah, constantly.
Just as a person. Yeah. There's a lot of little things to learn along the way. And I am very grateful to you. There have been times when we've had new people come in. We have mentees on Sesame Street, and they are learning from us. And they'll come in, and there'll be times when I'll say, Pam, do you mind if I put the mentee in for Telly's right hand? You're always like, yeah, good. Put them in.
Let them try.
Yeah, let them try it.
There's a lot of technical things about being a right hand, but for me, one of the key things is you obviously never pull down on that arm, even when your arm is tired.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing you can do to any puppeteer as a right hand is to become a burden and a weight. They should never know you exist as a right hand. And in fact, what I do is I send energy up in the right hand, constantly lifting up to help support the weight of the other, of the lead puppeteer.
Yeah, I think one of our performers has said, I like right-handed because I can just kind of turn my mind off and I don't have to think about anything. Yes, but I think you really do have to pay attention and really do be mindful to everything that's going on. You don't have to say the words, but you are kind of putting the emotion of that moment in there and acting along with the principal, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're not driving the scene. You're not going to drive the scene, which is what maybe turning your mind off is about. That you don't have to think about all those connections. But you do have to be there. You have to be so present, or you're, again, stuck in. Who cares? Yeah. You don't complete the character then. You just, turn him more into a dolly. And that's the thing that something like that, a stiff right hand will make you think, oh yeah, that's a puppet.
Right.
And you don't even realize why you're thinking that. But that's what happens. You go, oh yeah, it's a puppet. And that's, it's not that we don't want that, but that's not the character. Right. It's like we want them to live and breathe and not be a wooden thing.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about right-handing all day long.
Oh, yeah, I could.
But we should talk about Grundgetta, who, we mentioned was played by Brian Meal. And
for one season, I might add.
Only one season?
Yes.
Oh, Brian. So
you played her for one season, and I played her for 38 or something.
All right. So who is she?
She is a very independent grouch who happens to be emotionally involved with Oscar. We live separately. I like to say, I have my own condominium. And she's a gal of her own mind. What I love about her is she always says exactly what she's thinking. She doesn't pull punches. She's not rude and she's not mean. She's cranky. She's grouchy. But she's not rude and she's not mean. And she will tell you exactly what she thinks at any given time. And her whole thing actually has always been recycling. She's been, she recycles her clothes. They love trash. Yeah. Not garbage, trash.
Not garbage. Now, that comes from Caroll Spinney, does it not? I mean,
absolutely.
It's a trash can. It's not a garbage can.
Right.
Why is trash different than garbage, or what's the difference, would you say?
Garbage is usually wet. Trash is usually drier. Trash is things like paper and shoes and string and...
Or things you could reuse.
Or reusable things. Recycling more was what we call it in this day and age.
Right.
But that was sort of always a difference. It's not like we are running around in sewage. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes people get that. No. We don't particularly like wet garbage. That's not what we like. We like trash, which is stuff that's reusable, basically.
Well, and you've done a ton of Grundgetta shows over the years, and is there anything that sticks out to you, just like for one reason or another, that or how you shot something or an event that happened in that show that you're like, oh my gosh, this happened, and you'll always remember it?
Yeah, there's a bunch. One of them was Tracy Ullman was on the show. And she wanted to play a grouch. And so I gave Tracy Ullman grouch diction lessons, which was so much fun, teaching her to say, old fish. And she would go, old fish. She goes, oh, I'll never get it right. And then another one was we did My Fair Grouch, in which Jerry played Professor Piggins. And I was... Eliza Grouch Little. So it was very fun. I had a great hat, wonderful costumes. Andrea Martin and I played saleswomen in a Grouch shoe store. And we sold shoes to the Two-Headed Monster, which ended up being shoe boxes. Of course, because nothing would fit them.
Just give them the shoe boxes.
So it was very, very fun, weird stuff like that. There's so many. We almost got married. Yeah, Oscar and I were going to get married, and then we pulled the plug at the last minute because we thought it might make us happy, and grouches don't want to be happy. But little did we know, most married people aren't happy, so we probably should have done it.
Maybe you should have taken the plunge.
Yeah, and then we had it had a wonderful fantasy scene of having grouch babies, which was very interesting and weird.
I didn't know that.
Little grouch babies.
Oh my God.
Horrifying. So lots of fun. We went on vacation to Swamp Mushy Muddy, and we have a whole song that we sang floating down a swampy river, which was quite lovely. Little
yeah.
things.
Well, and so you got to work a lot with Caroll.
Yeah. Caroll.
You worked with him for a long time, and you worked with Jerry as well over those years. Anything that sticks with you about Caroll? Let's start with Caroll. Anything about him that sticks with you?
Caroll was Big Bird and Oscar. I think that is the most delightful thing about Caroll.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of never knew who you were going to get. I mean, there were days you would walk in and it'd be Big Bird, and he'd be so sweet and loving and funny and wonderful. And then there were other days you'd walk in and it was Oscar, and he was not having any of it. And something horrible had happened, and he was going to tell you about it over and over again until he got it out of his system.
Yeah.
But he was so, when he was on, he was just so 100% there and so authentic. There was authenticity that came from his heart.
I always felt that when he was delivering lines and he was just like having a good time, that the way that he would deliver his lines felt so in the moment, so right now, and very alive to me, and authentic, like you said. That's a great word to describe Caroll.
And it was so much who he was as that 5-year-old child. I don't think anyone I've ever met could access that child in himself the way Caroll could. Yeah. Caroll just went right there. Yeah. And every wonderful, joyful thing and every hurtful, sad thing that ever happened to that 5-year-old Caroll was right there in Big Bird every single time.
That is another thing that we have to be able to do as performers, is we have to be able to access those emotions and those memories, because we're actors. We are actors acting parts, and we just have, a big yellow bird on, but that big yellow bird is a character, and the character has emotion and feeling, and that is only effective if the person that's performing it is able to access emotion and bring it out in whatever way, through joy or frustration or anxiety, whatever it is. And that's why those characters on Sesame Street are so remarkable to me, is that they are very unique. Every one of them, they all experience the same emotions, but in their own unique way.
Correct. I think the fact is, too, that we make them very multi-dimensional and very multi-leveled, which a lot of times you will see a puppet show and people who say, and I talk with a lot, I do talks on puppetry all over the world, and a lot of times I'll say, well, I've seen puppet shows and I hate them. And I always say, it's because you've seen a bad puppet show.
Yeah.
You've seen one where people are just wiggling dollies, which is John Stone's famous term for what we do. And if you just wiggle the dolly, nobody cares, because just as any other acting role, there has to be that connection to the performer. You have to know that what I'm telling you is real, that it comes from a real place. It might be a big yellow bird, it might be a green monster, but it came from a real place. That's why we can believe it. Otherwise, we're just dollies, and that's not who we are. And I think that's also why Sesame Street has lasted 50 years.
I think so too, yeah.
These are genuine people genuine characters, and people want to relate to these characters. They want them as their friends. They want to keep them as part of their heart club, Yeah,
regardless of what age they may be.
Right, exactly. I mean, think about that. The first people who watch Sesame Street are now at least 50.
My age, yeah.
Your age,
they're where I am, or older. And it is remarkable to see the connection that people have with these characters. But that does come from the performer. It really comes from the performer and the writers. And
the writers are huge.
The workshop that has created these beautiful characters. Yeah. And, so many pieces to put this together. But our part of it in there is making sure that they are living, breathing characters, and that comes through us.
And all that hard work that goes in from the writers, from the sets, from the costumes and the people who build the puppets. I feel like if you don't do the best performance you can when you walk on that set with the most skill and the most commitment, you are insulting all of those people. It's just plain ridiculous to throw away their hard work by not giving the best performance you possibly can.
And it certainly doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen the day one when you walk in. It's not something that just happens. It takes time, and you have to cook for a while.
It's horrifying how slow it is, actually. I think people really think, I know how to do this. I can do Kermit's voice. How many times have you heard that? And they do a Kermit voice, which is kind of like a Kermit voice.
Sure.
But then they think they can just throw the puppet on and walk in front of a camera and make it happen.
Right. I mean, there are so many layers to what we do. And the voice is one of them.
Yeah, and it's like one of them.
There's so many.
And maybe not even the most important, but that's the one people think, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of voice, let's talk about Jerry for a second.
Yeah.
We all love Jerry. And he created these amazing characters. He did so many kind of one-timey characters that would just come in one time, and he always brought something unique and truly Jerry to those characters. Do you have any memories of Jerry on set or off set that you'd like to share?
Well, I think Jerry, he was such a he used to play a lot of video games in the Muppet Room, actually.
Yeah, he did.
He used to, I have this
Tetris. He played Tetris all the time, didn't he?
And it's like, yes, and he liked his crossword puzzles.
Yeah.
And it was like Jerry would be doing this thing that takes his focus and concentration, I think, is part of what that was about.
Yeah.
And when he was performing, again, 100%, the focus he had and the ability to draw on. I remember talking to him about how do you get all these characters that seem so different? And he was so observant of people and things. And even he would say, there was some squirrels outside playing, and then I just sort of started putting them in my mind about what they might sound like if they were talking to each other. And he says, that's what I brought in. He was so observant of everything. And he was such a smart man. I mean, he was quiet about it, but he was brilliant. Mm-hmm. And then he also had that resonant tone from singing, that voice that nobody else carried in the company. Nobody had a voice like that.
Nobody ever will.
Nobody ever will.
Amazing voice.
He was able to not only sing beautifully with it, but draw on so many different levels of his vocal abilities that he'd come in with another, and even his stupid girl voices were hysterical.
And always 100% there. Like he would commit. When you're going to bring a character in, you got to commit 100% to it.
Yeah. Or
don't wimp out.
It falls short and nobody likes it. That is one thing about our job I don't think people realize is that when you screw up in front of hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And then everybody knows exactly what you did wrong. Yeah. And it's terrifying. It can be absolutely terrifying because you really do put your soul out there, and then sometimes it's not good. It doesn't matter how much prep you've done and how much you put your heart into this. It's not good. But there are times.
Don't you feel like, I feel like earlier in my journey here in this profession, there was more fear, internalized fear and anxiety about messing up, about trying to be bold and failing. And what if I mess up? And how are they going to see me? And are they going to invite me back next season? And, and so on and so on. And then now 22 years later, I feel very confident, and I'm less scared of failure.
Right. I think those of us who I consider all of us who came in after the main 6 or 8, right? Mm-hmm. We all kind of had that fear coming in. And again, we also, I can't, every year my husband would say, so are you going back next year to Sesame? And I'd go, I don't know. And I wouldn't know until they called me. At the end of the summer, after maybe 8 or 9 years, I said, I think I'll probably be back. But it took 8 or 9 years of saying they're not, they are going to call me back. Every year was a little bit nerve-wracking. You can't perform well when you're afraid. So I think that means that those first 8 or 9 years are limited and do have a certain tenseness to every character that you do until you feel that sense of comfort, which the first guys all did because they were making it up as they went. It was their show.
Right.
They weren't going to lose anything. So those characters came in feeling freer. And those of us who had to learn a character from them or develop new characters had much more sort of a tense startup. I think. And you're right. After a certain number of years, you just go, well, they don't like it. Okay.
I'll do something else.
Next time I'll try again. I'll do something better.
I'm afraid, Pam, we're going to have to pause for a moment. We have to ask a puppeteer about not puppets.
Ask the puppeteer about not puppets.
Today, we are asking Peter Linz a question about not puppets.
Peter, what's your favorite sandwich?
Wow. Well, it's got to be a turkey leftover sandwich.
Describe, please. And this is something you're going to make?
Yeah, this is something I grew up with. And I've never been quite able to replicate it. But my father would usually smoke a turkey. And with the leftover turkey, Mom used to buy Roman meal bread. I don't even know if Roman meal bread is still a thing.
I think it is.
Slather some mayonnaise on that bad boy and the smoked turkey. And then the bread on top also with mayonnaise. This is going to gross people out, I know.
No, it sounds delicious.
I would squish it together really, really firmly. And
sounds good.
Leftover turkey sandwich.
So around Thanksgiving time.
Yeah. And I mean, there's variations on a theme. Since I've been an adult, you can add some cranberry sauce and make a little Thanksgiving sandwich. But no. It was the ones my mom made when I was a kid. That was my favorite sandwich.
Ask the puppeteer about not puppets.
Okay, we are back with Pam Arciero. You also did a bunch of different shows in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, other than Sesame Street. You were part of Great Space Coaster.
Correct. That was my first television show was Great Space Coaster.
Name the people that were on that show, too, because I know Kevin Clash was on that show and Jim Martin was on that show.
Noel McNeil was on that show. Mm-hmm. John Lovelady. Noel replaced John Lovelady. Mm-hmm. John Lovelady left the show. A man named Frank Kane, who did the big character Baxter, walked around. And then there was Chris Gifford was one of the humans. Believe it or not, he was the blonde drummer on the show.
Yeah.
Emily Bindiger was a singer who was the female on that show, the female character, human character.
And I had to look this up because I wasn't sure exactly who you played, but it says here, Huggles.
Yes. So there were three characters.
The pink one is what I did find a clip. I found a clip and I think you were the pink one.
I was the pink one and the blue one.
And the blue one?
Yeah, I played two of them at the same time. And Kevin played the orange one, Scruffy, in the middle. And they continually gave me script after script where I was talking to myself.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, please give this line to Scruffy. Because I can't go on like this. Forever, never, never. If you keep doing that to me, I'm going to be in trouble because it's hard to make that jump back and forth and back. So I was doing those
good acting challenge.
Voices. It was a great acting challenge.
Yeah, but an annoying one.
Annoying. And I shot 2 seasons, 3 weeks, and we did a whole bunch of shows, but it was 3 intensive weeks of shooting pretty much 8 a.m. till 10 at night, getting all those shows in the can. And it was kind of an interesting show because it was a free show, more or less. Hasbro funded the show and they would give it to different television shows throughout the country, syndicated shows for free if they would run a Hasbro commercial.
Really?
Yeah. So it was a really interesting process back then. It's just one of those things that those of us in the business obviously doesn't happen anymore at all. But that was the way the show got around.
I loved the Great Space Coaster when I was a kid.
That show had amazing guest stars for some reason. Kathleen Turner had just done Body Heat, and then she comes on and does a song with us. I was like, what is this hot woman doing on this kids show? It was amazing the guest stars they had. But one of their guest stars was Steve Allen, the great Steve Allen.
Really?
And he had his grand piano on, and the Huggles were we were under the piano, and Huggles coming up over the edge. So he's playing music, and we're waiting for some lighting cue or something, and he's playing. And Emily Bindiger, the lovely human character, was standing there talking to him about stuff, and I'm under the piano. And they're talking about puppets and performance and stuff like that. And Emily says, yeah, the puppets have been great. And I performed, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, you don't perform as a puppeteer, do you? You're far too pretty to be a puppeteer. So I crawl out from under the piano and I look at him and go, oh, I see. And he goes, no, I didn't mean you. I didn't mean it. He said, I didn't mean that you weren't. He got very flustered. But so that's my claim to fame, is that Steve Allen insulted me under the piano.
Oh, boy. You did Eureka's Castle.
Eureka's Castle, again with Noel McNeil and Cheryl Blaylock and Jim Krupa, the fabulous Jim Krupa.
Oh, Jim Krupa. And did that same group or most of that group go on to do Allegra's Window?
No. Allegra's Window was Marty Robinson and Anthony Asbury and Kathy Mullen. So it was a slightly different group. Krupa was not on that group. So the Krupa Noel group is a slightly different grouping of puppeteers and then went on to. And there was Heather Ash and Tim Lagasse were also on Allegra's Window.
Great Space Coaster was New York?
New York.
But the others, were those Orlando shows?
Half and half. Eureka's Castle, we shot the first 2 seasons in New York. And then the second 2 seasons were at Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando. And in fact, we were there for the opening of Nickelodeon Studios. I think we were one of the first shows or the first show shot at Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando. And they had a big dedication of the slime fountain, which was this huge deal. The big slime fountain.
Everybody wanted to be there.
Everybody wanted to get slime. My kids got to get slimed because of that. It was like, the be all and end all of their lives. But my favorite thing about the dedication of the slime fountain was that the big guest star we had was the professor from Gilligan's Island. The big star who helped us launch it was like, we were like such geeks.
Yeah. And you did Between the Lions.
I did Between the Lions.
You took over for Kathy Mullen. You did Leona. Were you on the show before that?
Yes, I was on as a background. I was just doing a lot of background, smaller characters and different things. I didn't have a main character, but for various reasons, Kathy no longer wanted to play Leona. And it was an interesting process for me because I wanted to make sure Kathy was okay with me being Leona. That was a huge deal for me.
Right.
And that was a legacy character for her. She really worked hard on that character. And for various reasons, when she chose to leave the character behind, I didn't want to be doing the character if she wasn't okay with it. I just wanted her to approve of it. So they offered me the job. Interestingly, I went in and auditioned, and I kind of knew what was going on, but I couldn't quite tell. And so then it was one of those auditions that just go incredibly well. And I think that's the only one I've ever had. But they called me before I was even in the elevator to tell me that they wanted me. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, because they had to go in studio Monday. And this was like a Thursday.
Oh, great.
So they were hustling it. And so they called me in the elevator. By the time I walked out on the street, they were asking me if I would do it. And I said, I will do it, but I have to ask Kathy. So then I went over to see Kathy and say, I just have to know you're okay with me taking this character over because I can't do it if you're not. And she said, oh, no, I think that's a good choice. So
what do you think is important in taking over a character from someone?
I think you have to know the essence of the character and you have to be true to that. Whatever that previous performer established as the core systems and values of that character, you have to be true to that. And you have to find that. It's not that you can't change it a little and have it become more who you are, but you do have to key into what that specific center, that what makes that character happy, what makes that character sad, has already been established by the previous person. So you have to know, and you have to feel that inside of you. You have to find that part of you that's similar to the previous performer, but somehow yours as well, making that real. And it is a really challenging thing to do it truthfully to the character as it was established and truthfully to yourself, authentically to yourself. How do you make that transition?
Yeah, it's harder than creating your own character out of nothing.
Right. Because you can make all the choices.
You get to make all the choices.
Right. And you can't do that with taking someone else's character. You have to think about how they've already made that choice, maybe, that you're having to make. So you also have to study them. And I do think that's huge. You have to really study what they've done before. And I think I played Leona maybe 8 seasons. I mean, we did a lot of seasons.
Yeah.
Kathy did maybe the same number of shows because they did so many shows. They did like 50 shows in the first season, another 20. But then I did like 8 seasons of 10 or 12 shows. Yeah. So it was like the similar amount. But I did enjoy playing Leona just tremendously. She was just such a joy, such a fun, strange, smart little character. And that was a really great family. That the family that was with, Anthony and Jen Barnhart and Peter Linz and myself. We had such a good time being a family, because we were the family of lions. Yeah. We had a good time being a family, and we shot a lot of that in Mississippi. We were out of town together. And as you know, when you shoot out of town, the bonds that form between the people, because you're not only are we playing a family, but we are the family. Yeah. Because the rest of your family's not there.
Yeah. They're your family.
Yeah. And it was a very special time. And I loved doing Between the Lines. I think that next to Sesame, it's one of the best shows that have ever been on for children.
That was a great show.
And especially, it's the kind of show that has proof that it got kids to read books and had all the research behind it, much like Sesame. It was very Sesame based. And we really touched a lot of kids in terms of reading. And that was super important to me. Yeah. Because that's huge.
So I want to talk about the O'Neill, the puppetry conference that you are the artistic director of and have been since...
I've been doing it for 18 years. Yeah.
First of all, can you tell people that maybe they don't know, what is the O'Neill Puppetry Conference?
Okay, so the O'Neill Puppetry Conference is part of the O'Neill Theater Center, and the O'Neill Theater Center's mission is to develop new works of theater, basically. They have a playwrights conference where they develop new plays. They have a musical conference where they develop new musicals. They have a cabaret conference where they develop new cabaret acts. They have a critics conference where they help train critics to critique well theater pieces. So we are the puppetry conference as part of that family of conferences. And our mission is to help create new works of puppet theater as well as nurture puppeteers, because again, what we do is so complicated. So we bring in artists who want to come and develop a new piece and share their techniques and thinking about puppetry, how they do a puppet show, how do they create puppet art.
And this is not just, a Muppet-style puppetry alone. There's every style of puppetry that you can think of, you will find at the Puppetry Conference.
Correct. It was started by Jane Henson right after Jim passed away. Jane and a group of other people, Margot Rose, who was the mother of Howdy Doody. Basically, she built and designed Howdy Doody. Bart Rockaburton, who was running the National Puppetry Institute then, which was a theater school at the O'Neill. Richard Termini, who was the first artistic director, along with George Latshaw, who's a very well-known puppeteer, no longer with us. But so it came out of sort of the general puppet community, not necessarily out of the Muppet community. And Jane wanted it to be not necessarily be anything to do with the Muppets. However, Marty Robinson, myself, and Kathy Mullen were the first guest artists who did teach Muppet technique that first year, 30 years ago. And amongst our students were Peter Linz, Heather Ash, Tim Lagasse, Mark Gale. I mean, that first year, we were teaching sort of a lot of the people who are now the second generation of puppeteers.
Right.
And they were all there. And then Richard Termini, Jan Rosenthal Stapura, who's no longer with us, and Peter McKinnon were teaching building at the same time. So they got the afternoon and evening with us teaching manipulation, and the mornings were with the building group, and they were building Muppets at the same time. It was a very exciting first year, but after that first year, Jane did not want any Muppets. So we do a video section we call Video Anarchy, which is usually anything but Muppet-style puppets. And that's led usually by Tim Lagasse and Marty Robinson.
And they create a film or several films? Does it depend on?
They create a 2 or 3 minute film, because a lot of it is not only about they shoot the film and then they learn how to edit the film and put it together. So that it does take time. And they only have 5 days. So sometimes they're building the puppets too. So they get out, usually we call it Too Short to Suck, to the film. That's at most 3 minutes. I don't think we've gotten much over 3 minute films.
Yeah. If somebody's interested in going to the O'Neill Puppetry Conference, what do they have to do? Can anybody go?
No, you have to apply. We have a fairly complicated application process. You go to theo'neill.org and you'll see the information. Generally, we want to know why you want to be a puppeteer and how you feel about puppetry. So it's not just You can't just kind of walk in off the street and become part of this conference, because it is more for professional puppeteers, really is what it is for. And since that first one, we have expanded greatly. A lot of it is international. I'm very much about bringing international puppet forms to the United States. I think that there's so much out there that we don't see here. But we've had artists who come and share what they want to do from Australia, from South Africa, from England, from France, from Germany, from all over the world. I try to go to a lot of events and see who I think is the best cutting edge artists out there, and I bring them over to teach for us so that we get that exposure here in the United States. And generally speaking, each strand will only have 10 to 12 people. So it is a limited number of people.
Very small. So how many would be there in one?
Total? About 60 participants and maybe 30 to 40 staff members, because we have a lot of staff. And you can take a class in marionette performance or marionette building. There are two different ones. And generally I'll have like a shadow puppet class, someone who comes in specializing in shadows or rod puppets, or whatever form they're deciding they want to teach. Hand puppets. The broad range of puppetry is represented at the O'Neill.
It must feel like such a vibrant, creative atmosphere for those few weeks.
It is. And it's Brigadoon, because it appears and then it disappears.
It's gone.
It's gone. And it's that community again. We're all about, puppeteers tend to be about community and family, because we are so odd. And particularly when you're a puppeteer not working with a large group the way we do, you're so isolated and out there working by yourself, and you go to a school and set up and do your puppet show and then leave kind of thing. Yeah. Or you do a show in a theater and then it's gone. It's only 2 or 3 of you. That the O'Neill becomes this wonderful place of community for our puppeteers. And I like to think of it as a place that is very nurturing. The O'Neill, the National Theater Institute that exists at the O'Neill, and the motto of the O'Neill is risk, fail, risk again. So we like to give people the chance to do anything they want. Any idea you can bring into me, we'll try and figure out how to put it on its feet. And if it fails, and we'll try again. And that's what we're doing in terms of creating new art out there. And
it sounds like a very validating experience to come in with an idea and try to work on it with other like-minded artists.
Yeah, I mean, that's really our whole intention, is just to let artists find their voices, however that may be. Get puppet artists able to express and move forward on an idea they've had or what they're trying to say to the world. All of us are here, and particularly those of us performers, we have something to say. We want the world to know something, whatever it is. So how do you say that? How do you get that out? Maybe it is from a grouchy character who's yelling at people to tell the truth, or that to let everybody have their own point of view, which is really ultimately Grundgetta's thing, is that grouchy people are just as valid as happy singing people. But whatever that voice is, how do you find that voice? How do you find what you want to say? And then how do you say it? I mean, and that's where we're coming from with the O'Neill. We want you to get that voice out there in the world and to feel like your time on earth has made a difference to yourself, if nothing else.
Sounds big.
It's a little big.
It is.
It is.
Do you love doing it? I
love doing it. I have loved doing this for the last 18 years as artistic director. Before that, I was the director of a thing called the Emerging Artists, which were second level puppeteers who come in and work on a special thing. So I've been with it for 30 years. This is our 30th year. And we are actually doing it virtually this year.
I was going to ask, how are you accomplishing it this year?
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to not be able to do it. So we're doing a 5-day version. Normally it's roughly 12 days because there's a small conference and then the big conference is 9 days. And so we're doing a 5-day virtual where people who applied got in. And I really couldn't have done it without Jean Marie Keevans. She is my right hand. She's my associate artistic director. And then also Preston Whiteway and Chandler Smith, who are the people at the O'Neill. And the O'Neill is providing all of the technical support, which makes it so much easier for me. And I have to say, creating things online is so much harder than doing it.
I know.
It's so much more complicated.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. I mean, we're getting it, but gosh.
Okay, Pam, I'm going to give you some quick questions, rapid fire questions now.
Okay.
And just whatever comes to the top of your head, no judgment. Here we go. Are you ready?
Sure.
What is the hardest part about being a puppeteer?
probably crouching on the floor with your arm over your head. I mean, it's hard. It's physically hard work. It is physically hard work. It's fun. And fortunately, because I come from dance, I think it's been better for me, but it is physically challenging work.
What's the easiest part about being a puppeteer?
Oh, being with other puppeteers. I think, and actually having the joy of creating scenes together. That's, once you're on a roll, once it's really happening, oh God, it is heaven, and it's fun and it's easy.
What's your biggest strength as a puppeteer or a performer?
Oh, that's interesting. Biggest strength. When I hook my character, I am not present anymore. And that, if you can do that, it's, and Fran Brill said this to me. Fran Brill said, you just sort of channel them from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you can actually channel that character. It's cool.
How about your biggest weakness as a puppeteer?
Probably the same thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Right?
That's good. Yeah,
not being able to channel.
Yeah.
There are times when nothing comes in and the character is horrible and I'm crying inside trying to get through the shot. That's also, that's the same thing. It's one and the same.
Yeah. If you weren't a puppeteer, what would be your career?
Well, when I took the test in high school, I was supposed to be a mortician. So... So I can't imagine
Seriously?
That.
How does that become
Myers?
How does that out as being a thing? That's one of the choices.
I don't know. It was like, what? I mean, because it's something about the way you deal with people and about, I don't know. It was just very
that's a good thing or a bad thing, though.
It was very strange.
All right. Here's the next one.
I don't think I would have been that.
No. There are probably people listening. They want to hear you tell them what they have to do to become a Sesame Street Muppet performer. So what would that be?
That would be learn to sing, learn to act, learn to move, and then pick up a puppet and work really hard in front of a camera with a puppet. That's how you would get here.
There you go. Our buddy, Jerry Nelson, said to me a long time ago, he said, Sesame Street's great, but you always have to have something that is your own, that you create. So, Pam, what is that for you, do you think?
I would have to be the O'Neill. I mean, that is really, and I knew that when I took it on. It's my legacy. It's my thing. It's my heart. It's my way of helping other puppeteers become better puppeteers, become more authentic puppeteers. And I try to give them what I wanted given to me in order to continue on. And that, I think that is my heart. I think that is my outside thing,
I love it. I love it. Pam, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Great questions. Thank you.
Such a lovely person, that Pam Arciero. Well, that's Below the Frame. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our show today was produced by me. Our theme song was written by Stephanie DeBruzzo and performed by the Mighty Weaklings. Our podcast artwork was created by Dave Holteen at DaveHolteenDesign.com. A word from our sponsor players today were Tal Bennett, who wrote the spot, Austin Costello, and Martin P. Robinson. Thanks to Pam Arciero, Peter Linz, and Martin P. Robinson for being a part of this episode. And thank you to you, the fans, for listening. I am Matt Vogel, and we will see you the next time when we go Below the Frame. Bye-bye.
Go, below the frame.
Come in.
Dad, did I miss it?
Yeah, Jack, it's over.
Ah, okay. Next time.
Next time. Thanks, Jack.